Hello and welcome back. Long time no see. I think I'll make this my intro because I'm always late for making content for this channel. But anyways, it is the end of yet another year and I wanted to show you the books that I read in 2021. The ones that I started this year but haven't finished will not be in this video, though there are quite a bunch. I hope you'll enjoy it and let's begin. So in total I read, or finished rather, 13 books this year, which is not much, but for this video it will be better since I'll be able to talk about each one. I will divide them into the good reads, with two subcategories, classics and fantasies, and the not so good reads, or the disappointing ones, and lastly, one retelling. The first book, which was also the best book I read this year, was Dostoyevsky's Crime and Punishment. To be honest, I struggled with the beginning of this book. It being the first of Dostoyevsky's novels that I read, I was just getting accustomed to his writing, but once I got in the story and understood bits by bit some of his meanings behind this complicated and tangled story of inner conflict and social injustice, I was taken back and shocked. This book is so good, it touched me like no other book has done before. It made me question my ideas of right and wrong, the concept of law and justice, and the way that some people follow to gain more power. The characters in this book were very interesting, especially the protagonist, Raskolnikov. Though he committed a crime, I actually liked his character and respected his intelligence and rooted for him. I will need a longer video and I plan to make a review video for this book and maybe will one day by God's will, but for now I will say that it deserves all the credit it gets. The second book was also by Dostoyevsky and it was Notes from Underground. This book was messed up like its narrator. He kept telling us how bad and vile and spiteful he is, and also by doing that, showing us that we are in some degrees like him too, or at least that is how I understood it. And try as we may, we can't deny the things he says, even though they are despicable and hateful. We know that somewhere deep in our hearts, we feel and think some of the things he accuses us of. This was a dark and deep book that I liked for its honesty, but if I am being honest myself, I would say I need someone to explain this short book for me in order to fully appreciate it. Or at least to read it again one day in the future. Like I said, I liked it, but I wouldn't recommend it for someone who is starting to read Dostoyevsky. The next two books are by Thomas Hardy. The first is The Return of the Native. Hardy is one of my favorite Victorian authors and I love reading his books. I read this back in late 2020 and left it for a while, then returned back to finish it and loved it. It has one of the most dramatic endings that I have yet seen in his books, but all the same I love the setting of this novel, though it was darker than his other works. I enjoyed it and loved the characters, as always making mistakes and realizing that they have made them and trying to correct them. Each his own way, some for the common good and some others for selfish reasons. Also, there always has to be a man or a guy in his novels who is all goodness and righteousness and whom we all root for from the beginning. This book I would definitely recommend to classic lovers. The next Hardy book was a short one by the name of Under the Greenwood Tree. This one, in contrast to The Return of the Native, was a very funny and light book, with again beautiful and very lovable characters, especially the church choir. Their conversations were the best part of this book, and I thought more highly of Hardy after reading this book for writing it in such a clever and witty way that made me smile and even laugh. Would highly recommend it to anyone who loves classics with some bits of humor. The next and last book from the classics that I read and loved this year was Daddy Longlegs. I'm sure many of you have watched the old cartoon and perhaps know the story of Judy Abboud like I did before starting to read this book, but I loved it all the same. I actually enjoyed it better knowing the whole thing beforehand, and many things made a lot more sense than if I had not known the story. This book, like the previous one, made me laugh a lot. There were moments that I couldn't stop from laughing at the silly things that Judy would say or do, especially while talking to her daddy Longleg through her letters. So I would highly recommend you to check this book for a good entertainment. Now to the other genre that I love besides classics, which is fantasy. I read three good fantasies this year. The first and the best was The Name of the Wind. This book is very famous, and I had heard of it from a long time ago and decided that I needed to read it and know why it was so loved. So I had a lot of expectations, and when you have a lot of expectations, you tend to be disappointed easily. And I was disappointed a little by the story, in the way that it didn't have much going on as I expected. I don't know if it was because the story was narrated over the span of many years or because the author just wanted to introduce Kavoth and the world to us. It was more like the foundation to the upcoming books. But the world building blew me away. I don't remember reading a better fantasy world setup. I loved it, and now that I'm reading the second book, I appreciate it even more. I loved Kavoth's character and narrative. I loved reading his adventures and can't wait to read more of it, and hoping that the long awaited third book will be out soon. I would recommend this book to anyone who loves fantasy, or even if someone is just starting to read fantasy. I think this will be a good place to start. The second fantasy I read was gifted to me by a good friend of mine, so I had no idea what it was about. It's called A Natural History of Dragons, which is the first book of a series of books that have the same character or narrator in them. I found it to be a fictional biography of a fictional character living in a parallel Victorian era world where dragons and other mythical creatures are real. The female protagonist, who tells us the story of her life, was very lovely and would have made for a good friend. I loved her adventures in seeking and studying dragons and searching for their whereabouts and the mishaps she gets herself into while doing that. Also loved her relationship with her husband, which is the kind of romance that I want to see more in books. It was a refreshing book, and I can't wait to go and read the other books in the series. It's a book that I would highly definitely recommend. The third fantasy book was a children's book by J.K. Rowling, The Ickabog. I love Rowling's writing style. I loved her Harry Potter series and knew I would love this one too, and I did immensely like it. She's a clever writer that knows how to capture the attention of her audience from the start of her works. This book is good to be read to children or even to us adults. I think we all can take something out of it, especially not judging someone or something, in this case, by the things that we hear about them, but by actually going and talking to them and knowing them better ourselves. I love the courage the children in the book showed, and I also loved the little beautiful kingdom that the author created in this book. Now to the books that disappointed me this year. The first one is a historical fiction / gothic novel called The Essex Serpent, which from the name is about a rumour about a serpent that has been seen in Essex, England, and the adventures of some characters who try to find out whether it's real. The book's language was elegant but not to my taste, and probably that is my biggest negative outtake of the book. I like the characters, especially the protagonist and the vicar she meets in Essex, England. I like their conversations, though struggled at some places to understand the meaning behind their words. It was an okay book, though I'm sure many people love it and see it in a better light than I did. And while I was preparing this video, I found out that it will be made into a TV miniseries, which I'm surprisingly looking forward to watch. It may be better than the book for me. The next was Here Lies Arthur by Philip Reeve. If you have watched my last year's read, you'll know that I love this Mortal Engine series a lot, and so I was kind of looking forward to reading something good about The Legend of Arthur, which I love, from the same writer, but I was disappointed and I decided not to finish the book. The reason simply being that he made Arthur and his knights look like a bunch of thieves, and even though the message behind this was to tell us that legends do not necessarily come from good people, but even bad people can be turned through fabrication of stories into great legends. But still, I couldn't bear to read about Arthur in this light. I love the good version of his legend better, and I will stick to that. The next book is The Wonder. I like the story and the idea of this book, which was partly based on true stories of that time, the Victorian age, about some girls who survived without any food for many months. What I didn't like was the protagonist, who was supposed to be this intelligent and highly educated nurse who went to see the case and observe through the eyes of science, but who turned out not to be so intelligent and clever after meeting a journalist who was also interested in the case. And the nurse just went from being an independent scientific person to a woman of no real mind of her own, who was just following whatever this journalist was suggesting. So the story was good, but the characters were not, except for the Wonder Girl herself, who was named Anna and who was lovely and innocent. I would recommend this book, however, if you want to know the secret behind these what called fasting girls. The other book is probably one that you've seen or heard about, which is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Again, like The Wonder, I love the idea of the book. I thought it was pretty clever, but the execution and the characters were not good in my opinion. I love the parts of Addie going back and forth through her lifetime narrative, but I didn't like her relationship with the dog, nor did I like the ending, which was not very satisfying and kind of felt like it was forced. This was the first book I read by this famous author, and to be honest, it was not very encouraging and not as good as I expected. We'll see if I can read other books by her and give her another chance. And now to the last book, or ebook in this case, which was also a disappointment, and it was a retelling of Little Women called Joe and Laurie. I don't want to spoil Little Women here, but if you have read the book and was disappointed by some aspects of it like me, and tried to read a retelling to feel better, this would not be the book. Because even though it made the ending like I wanted it to be in Little Women, it did it so badly I wish I hadn't wasted my time reading it. Would not recommend. And that was it. Those were all the books that I managed to finish in 2021. I hope you have found some amazing reads as well in the year past and discovered beautiful writings and authors. Hoping to read better and read more in the new year, and till we meet again.